Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives. David Gouthro, back with another episode of Discover Fresh Perspectives. And this week, we're going to be discovering from fresh perspectives with Ian Hern. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, David. So great of you to have me on.
So, Ian, when we last spoke briefly, you said one of the things that you're passionate about is about men's mental health. So I'd just like to dive into that a little bit and just have a conversation about that, starting with why is your interest around men's mental health? Let's make no assumptions here.
Okay. I came at it from two different ways. The first one was in pursuit of my own mental health. And the second was when I started doing the research and I started to realize just how pervasive it really is that men have typically poor mental health. The more I studied into it, the more I realized, let me throw a couple statistics at you.
Okay.
There's an estimated million men in Canada every year that suffer from major depression, but that's only the ones who self-disclose. We have a mutual colleague who works in the construction industry who will tell you that the numbers are actually much worse than that. There's about 4,000 suicides in Canada every year, of which 75% are men. And only 30% of people who access mental health resources in Canada are men. So there's a consistent trend that has led people to label this an epidemic in society that men, well, we don't know how to handle our emotions. And so when I took my own personal experiences and I matched those up with what I was finding in my research, it really told me this is something needs to be talked about more.
So, and any questions I ask, if you're not comfortable responding to me, and that's totally okay. But so the first question that comes to mind is what was the catalyst for you to dive into this area of exploration?
Well, that's a fantastic question, David. So I want to paint a picture for you. I want you to imagine a 15-year-old boy who stands at the edge of a precipice. He's alone. In a way he never imagined that he could be alone. He's consumed, eaten alive by fear, doubt, anger, self-despair, self-loathing, hopelessness, and nobody else knows the state that he's in. His parents have no idea of the crisis he faces. His few friends have no idea how torn up he is inside. He stands on the edge of a decision, and in this moment, all thought, all decision has been reduced to only this: jump or walk away. Even he does not know what the last choice is that he will make until he turns and begins to walk. That was me at 15 years old,
Wow.
at such a place of loss in my life that I had no idea that there were avenues left available to me. And there was one person in my life at that time who saved me, literally kept me alive. And that is what started my journey toward trying to figure out what mental health even was. Never mind, how do you get it?
So, Ian, was that person someone who, at the time, I mean, you described as if it was a moment in time where you could jump or walk away, and you walked away. What was it that enabled you to walk away? Like, was it the support of this person, knowing the person was out there? Like, why did you make the choice that you did? Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, obviously.
I thought nobody cared.
Mm.
I thought nobody wanted to know about my feelings or that my feelings mattered to anyone. Excuse me. And this one person who was a youth leader of mine at the time, she saw me. She was actually able to see past all the shields that I had put up to keep people from finding out how bad a place I was in. And she drew me to talk. And in talking to her and learning that there was somebody that I actually mattered to, that was enough to provide that ray of light that I needed.
So, So see, there's a number of elements here to unpack, and one is that you realize you're at that precipice. This other person did as well. Men, from what you've said, don't typically talk about these things, don't solicit help. So what are some of the signs, that sort of the silent crying out signs that we should be more aware of to pay attention to? Because I think if it's too easy to turn a blind eye to something that you're not aware of, right? Once you're aware of it, then you have a responsibility to either do something about it or not and take responsibility for that. But what can one notice where they say this is an opportunity for me to intervene or offer support to this person?
Well, men are taught that we're supposed to be tough, we're supposed to be strong, we're not supposed to show things like fear or sadness, we're not supposed to look weak, we're not supposed to show that our feelings are hurt. And most of the time, what seems to happen with men is that we channel those emotions into other things. Some people get really angry and they're always in a bad temper and they lash out. Some people turn to substance abuse. Some people turn to any number of other addictions that it's possible to get into. And it's just most of the time, I think it's we look for things like honesty, like vulnerability, like honest and open communication. And if that's not there and it's being replaced by something else like substance abuse or like anger or, God forbid, violence, then at that point in time, should be asking ourselves, what is it that's driving this particular behavior that we see so that we're not seeing the person that we know or at least hope is in there somewhere.
So there's kind of two channels that are going on here now of exploration. One is how I recognize for myself that, choose to do something about it. Excuse me. And the other channel is how do I recognize when someone else is going through that? And I'd like to stick with that one for just a minute. So, what are the signs that someone else is kind of is reaching out or crying out for help or is in need of support? What are the signs? And then the second part of that is, so then what do I say or do? How do I approach someone like that and overcome my fear of maybe causing things to go worse and blow back in my face? So first part, I'm asking too many questions at once. So what are some of the signs that I could be paying attention to for someone out there might be in need of some support?
Well, I think the number one thing for me, I can't claim more than my own self-observance in this particular area, but the number one thing that I have noticed in myself and in other men is the tendency to lash out. More often, I think, more often than not, that when a man starts lashing out, it's because he doesn't know how to handle something else that he's feeling.
Okay.
So, as odd as it may seem to think of something like aggression as a cry for help, in some ways it really is.
Hmm.
It not always. Some people are just angry, but in so many ways it can be a cry for help. Sometimes, and this is going maybe a little bit into the feely sort of thing, but uh, I find myself when I look at people, I look at the eyes. I don't necessarily look at what they're saying or what they're doing. I look at the eyes because the eyes will tell you so much that the behavior won't. And sometimes at the peak of someone's self-destructive behavior or other destructive behavior, you can see in their eyes that there's something missing or that there's something bothering them, eating at them. And as far as the second part of the question goes, all you can do is offer yourself as the person who can listen. When a man has spent his entire life being taught to deny his feelings, to be tough, real men don't cry, that kind of thing. they're not going to open up just to the first person that says, I'm willing to listen. It takes time to build up a level of trust and relationship. And that's what it really takes when you talk about what can you do is build relationship.
Yeah, because I guess without that, it's really tough to have one of those challenging conversations because you don't know where that other person is coming from, if they're to harm or to help. And I would imagine it's easier when I think of my friends. What I would be aware of is if there's been a change in behavior where all of a sudden there's a shift, either getting more aggressive or more,
Yeah.
kind of going the other way, then I'd probably feel pretty comfortable asking, just like what's going on. But with someone I didn't know, that would be much harder. Someone like who's a professional colleague, for example, because you were talking about our mutual friend who was talking about how in the industry she works in, there's so many suicides and things like that, and it's a pretty macho environment that she works in. So I'm just thinking how you go about having those tough, caring conversations in an environment that not stereotypically is supportive of those sorts of things.
Right. And if in her case, from what she and I have talked about, the only thing that works is to continue to show up
Hmm.
because men don't trust her when she first walks onto the job site. They don't just open up to her as soon as she says, oh, I'm an emotional support worker. I'm here to listen to any problems you may have. They don't just say, oh, okay, sure, no problem, and spew everything. She has to be there over time and build relationships and have these men learn to trust that she's going to respect what she hears from them. I actually came up with a series of questions that you might find helpful in regard to that. When was the last time that someone asked you how you were doing and you were honest? I mean, truly answered honestly about how you were doing or how you were feeling.
You mean not just say fine?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Do you ever allow yourself to be vulnerable? How close do you allow others to get to truly knowing you? Have you ever had your emotions triggered and not understood why?
So let's back up to one of those questions, Ian. So allow yourself to be vulnerable. Now, what does that look like? Like I know the word, but how, right? Say a little bit more about allow yourself to be vulnerable, please.
When you're in a situation, let's go back to even the question before that and tie that in. When was the last time that you told anyone how you're really doing? We're all trained in society that to say, how are you doing is really hello. And so we answer fine because we think the person is saying hello and not actually, how are you doing? And I don't know if you've ever had it happen to you. I had one time someone stop me and say, no, what I asked you was, how are you doing? And that shook me to my core when that happened because I didn't believe that anybody asked that question sincerely.
Right.
So
Right.
being vulnerable means being willing to be honest with someone else about your state of being, whether it's your mental health, whether it's your emotional stability, whether it's something going on in your life, like your job you're having troubles with, whatever it may be, being honest about things that you struggle with or things that you wrestle with, things that cause difficulty in your life, and knowing that the other person could choose to react negatively in some way, whether it's to poke fun at you or to poo poo your experiences or to make all of the slurs that we are familiar with that say men are like weak like women. We love to compare men to strength and women to weakness, which is another terrible stereotype that we built, but that's another side topic.
Where my mind went with that when you were describing it, Ian, as I thought, to me, a time when I would be vulnerable is putting myself in a position where I might be judged
Yes.
and then have to deal with the consequences of that. Am I willing to be judged is the first question. Am I willing to deal with the consequences? is the second one. So sorry, I just locked into that vulnerability question because it started to get me thinking, but you have some other questions as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw in one more thing for you to the vulnerability, just to make myself the example. I
Sure.
mentioned to you off the top that this is my first opportunity to be on a podcast and to talk with you like this. And I am feeling vulnerable myself in wondering how good of a job I'm going to do. So for you and I to share, and for me to say I'm being vulnerable with you in this instance, it is I'm nervous.
Hmm.
And it's as simple as that. It's a very minor thing. It's a pretty minor situation as such things go, but it is an opportunity for vulnerability.
And I would imagine that one of the worst things that I could do is comment on that and say and discount it, like say, "Oh, you're fine. You don't appear nervous at all. No need to be." I need to just be able to sit with it and hear it and not
Exactly.
feel that I have to respond.
Exactly. Exactly. So some of the other questions, have you ever had your emotions triggered and not understood why? Have you ever knowingly avoided acknowledging areas in your life in which you need to grow? Have you ever felt like you're going through the motions of life but not really living?
Hmm.
If your answer to any of these is yes, then we need to have a further conversation.
Yeah, and the first conversation, if I said yes to any of those, would be a conversation with myself, right? Because those are all awareness building questions.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And with yourself is where it has to start. And the one thing I think is in our technology laden world that we live in now, it's become so easy to be anonymous, to be able to criticize or to judge other people without feeling like there are consequences for those choices that we make. And we can absolutely destroy someone's life and have no idea that we're doing it and go on about our own lives feeling pretty darn good about ourselves because we haven't had to face the consequences of seeing what our choices have done to other people. But it
We
also means we've learned to hide more because on the internet, what's the greatest thing about the internet? You can hide. You don't have to be yourself. You don't have to tell people this is my real name, this is where I live. You can come up with a fake name and a fake profile for yourself and then go about and wreak terrible disorder.
way too many uncomfortable truths there, Ian. So you made a comment near the beginning of our conversation about where we're trained or socialized to be a certain way, and whether that's conscious or unconscious, formal, informal. If it's an issue, how do we start to change that? How do we change that? It's tougher to change for us, but what when do we start helping people understand some of these dynamics? Like what's the solution so we don't have to deal with quite as many problems because people are more aware and handling that themselves? What are the points of intervention?
It always comes back to me to a conversation, a real conversation. And like you say, everything starts with yourself and your own self awareness, recognizing your own triggers. I'm reading Carolyn Stern's Emotionally Strong Leader right now, which is just a fantastic book. Plug, plug, plug. And, she's really got a lot of good things to say about discerning your own level of emotional intelligence and how your emotions affect you. And that's the best place to start for any of us, because if you recognize something in yourself, it's a whole lot harder, if you're being honest about it, to judge someone else for the same thing. And the level of knowledge comes through conversation. The level of relationship comes through conversation, which involves two things. One is the willingness to be vulnerable and put yourself out there and set the example of what it is that you're talking about. And the second piece is the other person feeling like they have been received, like you mentioned about me being nervous, that the person has been received and been heard without being judged. And each conversation that you have with someone who feels like they can test the waters a little bit and open up a little bit, each time that they receive a positive response from you is going to encourage them to do it a little bit more. And in that building up of relationship, that's where the deeper conversations start to happen, where we are educating each other.
So, I agree with all that, Ian, and I do believe it's, there's that, but it's still a one-to-one relationship. So what I'm wondering is, are the points of leverage we can magnify, like getting more people tuned into this sooner? So, for example, is there something we could be doing in the education system? Or should the federal, I'm just half joking about what I'm next to say. No, I'm fully joking what I'm about to say, but the federal government should impose that men have to have, training and being, more self-aware and things like that. So they don't run into as many problems that suck funds from our healthcare system and things like that. Like, is there a way to expand it beyond the one-to-one? Because I realize that's best. Not always possible, not always fast enough. Any
Not
other
always.
thoughts?
Well, I think a forum like this is a great place to start. I'm, hoping to have many more opportunities to discuss men's mental health in a public forum. I think in the corporate world, it's not actually as quote unquote funny as you think.
Mhm.
The problem is that sensitivity training doesn't happen until you blow it. So it's after a man blows up at a colleague in the workplace or loses his stuff on a boss or says derogatory things about females or pick your poison, whatever it may be. That's the point at which that man is encouraged to go take some sensitivity training. And that's not necessarily going to provide the most positive results when it's a forced situation. So I think there is a great need in the corporate culture to start opening corporations' eyes to exactly how they can go about building a workplace of emotional intelligence where people are encouraged to feel and share their emotions in a more positive way.
I remember when the conversations first started hitting the public around emotional intelligence, and I was working with a client in the oil patch. And my direct client really liked the thought of emotional intelligence and the value that that could bring. But culturally, talking with a group of engineers and scientists and things about this, not so cool until there was an instrument that came along that had a whole pile of metrics. Then all of a sudden, because we can measure this, now we can talk about it, and it made it okay to bring it into the organization. But it's interesting what hurdles one has to overcome before you can start to have those conversations. So, you mentioned one where there's something has blown up. Another could be organizational statistics that all of a sudden we're seeing that a lot of people are having more time off, and they're accessing our support programs for mental health issues and things like that. But it seems like usually there's some kind of a trigger or a cultural imperative that says we need to start talking about that. Maybe we have to drop copies of Carolyn's book on, on the desk of CEOs, or more often than not. I mean, one of the trends that I have seen is that uh, as more senior executives have kids, women in particular, that have gone into management positions that are considered credible, and they're starting to really, rap on the head of their fathers to say, this stuff is really important. I think you better pay attention to it. And I actually have a lot of hope for younger people coming into the organizations that are much more aware of these sorts of things. But there's still so much more work to do. And thank goodness you're willing to have conversations about this, Ian.
It just is so important. You say once you become aware of something, you have a responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, before I was aware of my own issues with mental health, and I've spent decades working on my own mental health to bring it to a more positive place. And that was fine up until I started to become more aware of just how pervasive it really is across our masculine society.
Mm.
And then I had a choice. to make, and I made my choice that I think it's something I need to help us talk about for
Mm.
sure.
I wonder
And
sometimes too about the language we use. You know, the differences in the way that these phrases land on people. So, one is mental illness, another is mental health, and another is mental wellness. And you know, I wonder if we use different words, it makes it easier get into the conversations because for some reason with mental health, like when you talk about physical health, people don't automatically go, "Oh, there must be something wrong in order to be, you know, physically healthy." But when we hear for some reason mental health, we think there must be a problem that we're trying to fix, as
yeah,
opposed to more general mental wellness and about well-being. Because there's still a lot of stigma attached to the word health when it's attached to mental, and certainly around mental illness itself.
for sure. And mental illness instantly evokes the DSM and all the psychological definitions and actual diagnoses. So, someone who is clinically depressed has a mental illness, according to the professional diagnoses in the literature and so on and so forth. But you're absolutely right. We don't want to have conversations about mental illness because that's starting from a place of negativity. We don't want to talk about what's wrong with people. We want to talk about how people can become healthier. And wellness, I have a little issue with the word wellness because it's such a buzzword in the corporate industry. Um, Anytime that they want to make it sound like they're increasing their productivity and their stability of their workers and everything, it's labeled wellness in some shape or form. And it turns out that, you know, they're offering yoga classes 3 times a week. So I think the language is absolutely correct, but it has to follow up as well with the awareness and the intention that goes along with it. And I think I don't know. It's easy to point fingers at the government. Of course, we all do quite well at pointing fingers at the government. And I worked in the government office for 11 years. So I'm perfectly familiar with exactly how these things work out. The bottom line is if you come to someone and you say, for example, the loss of work days and productivity in BC due to substance abuse and related mental health concerns is estimated to cost about $847 million a year. And that's
At
BC,
BC, wow. Yeah,
one province out of a relatively small country, and the numbers are staggering. So when you approach corporations, government or private, with that perspective, then like you say, you're talking bottom dollar, then suddenly they're listening to statistics that can be evaluated and enumerated.
yeah. Too bad that's what it takes. Okay. So, Ian, we've been talking a little bit about mental health today and about men specifically. So, um, what I'd what I'd like if you could is provide a couple of tips for uh, for men to reflect on as they leave this conversation, and maybe a couple of questions that you know for women who care about their male partners. What are some things that they should pay attention to? So, first of all, two questions for me when I leave this, for me as a guy to think about. What are two questions? Your top two.
Okay. The two things that I think are the most important are self-awareness and resilience. So the first question ties into how do I develop self-awareness? And that unpacks into obviously a whole lot more. And then how does having greater levels of self-awareness help me to develop resilience? The goal being that the more you are aware of yourself, of what triggers you, the more you are able to look at yourself and go, okay, this is a situation that could stand some attention. So, how do I develop self awareness? It starts with giving yourself grace. It starts with being able to be honest with yourself without judging yourself the same way that you wish other people would take your honesty and not judge you for it. I don't know what your experience is. My experience is that I'm a much harder critic of myself than anyone else could ever possibly be. And so for me, developing self-awareness was the absolute core of everything, because all of my resilience, all of my work toward mental health started out of self-awareness.
Okay. Okay. So that was the first part. Well done. Here's the second one. You are someone who has a male partner, regardless of what your own gender or preference is. So whether you're a man or woman, but your partner is a guy. What are two things just pay attention to that say maybe I should ask him how he's doing?
Well, I think you mentioned a major one earlier when you said something changes. If all of a sudden there's more anger or emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal is a major one, because if a man doesn't know how to deal with dangerous emotions, vulnerable emotions, the first thing we do is crawl into a hole, pull the dirt in on side of us, and then shut the door on top of the dirt to make sure that nothing could ever possibly get out. So if a man becomes withdrawn emotionally, that's a pretty big warning sign. If, like we say, if something changes where all of a sudden his personality doesn't seem the same, his way of dealing with difficult situations most likely he'll struggle more. You'll see your partner have much more difficulty with things that you think are very simple to deal with. And that's a pretty big warning sign. Can't come up with an example off the top of my head.
No, but that's good. I think that's, pay attention to that. So we've been talking primarily, well, exclusively about men's mental health. Obviously, mental health is an issue for everybody. And the reason we focused in on men today, because it's more of an issue and it's, more under the surface. So I'd like to thank you for a couple of things, Ian, for being here today, but also this is your first podcast. You actually approached me to see if you could do that, to offer that. So I really appreciate that as well. And so hopefully we're getting a lot of people to think more about this for themselves. So for both of those things, thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you, David. It was my pleasure, and I couldn't thank you enough for being willing to just open the conversation.
Totally my pleasure and my learning. David Gouthro, discover fresh perspectives. Hopefully you got a few more today, and we'll get more the next time when you tune back in. Subscribe now, because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.